Hello. This is a continuation of my summary of Alistair Parker's short history of the Second World War, this video dealing with the German and Soviet forces in 1941 and the 1941 campaign, that's Barbarossa. So it's the second part of the summary of Parker's chapter 4 on Operation Barbarossa. So let's start off with German army strength. German army strength was based on a well-educated society whose history meant that scientists, technologists, and especially soldiers secured respect and high status. Although the Nazis had weakened German education and science with their anti-intellectualism and their anti-Semitism, the accumulated German intellectual capital couldn't be dissipated in the few brief years of Nazi dominance. The Nazis did succeed in reducing suspicion between social classes by distracting attention from continuing social inequalities. This reinforced German social cohesion, and a high degree of social cohesion is an essential condition of military effectiveness, as it facilitates a sense of mutual loyalty amongst the troops and also between officers and men. Despite Nazi dominance, the independence of the army was left largely intact, at least until 1944. As the army expanded in size, it used its own methods of recruitment, promotion, and training. In wartime, it was distinguished by a high level of leadership, both at the level of higher command, officers at every level, and NCOs. The prestige of the army meant that these leaders were drawn from men of high potential. The General Staff Corps continued to attract intellectually able men. Ideally, discipline was based on consent, so that officers and NCOs secured obedience by their skill, and army discipline didn't stifle individual initiative. German soldiers were able to combine ready obedience to orders with the individual ability to work out the correct response to unexpected situations. The different arms of the army were trained in the habits of flexible cooperation. As in other armies, German soldiers were capable of fear, panic, and disorder, but the average military skill level was unmatched. Although German industry provided the army with well-designed and reliable equipment, only a fraction of the men were highly mobile, these being the panzer and motorized infantry, later termed Panzer Grenadier divisions, which in fluid warfare dominated the battlefield. Now let's turn to the Red Army. Formed from an agglomeration of diverse peoples, often including mutually and uncomprehending or hostile nationalities, the soldiers varied enormously in their education, with men who were illiterate and uneducated, and others who were intellectually sophisticated. Rigid and harsh discipline was common, based on unquestioning obedience. Yet, drunkenness, muddle, and inefficiency were often tolerated. Staff work was poor. Communications were primitive. Cooperation between various arms of the military were inadequate. The chain of command was cumbersome. Intellectual initiative was rare. The Soviet system under Stalin in the 1930s didn't encourage the taking of individual responsibility. At the end of the 1930s, a great military purge that fostered a frightened conformity amongst senior officers, only about half of whom had not been killed. The Red Army was inflexible, slow-moving, and prone to disorganization. Both officers and men were baffled by the unexpected. Although some fought tenaciously right from the start, others only served through compulsion and surrendered as soon as the chance came. Now, the campaign of 1941 itself. Lasting 6 months, It's easily summarized, but the key thing is that the immense German superiority was not quite great enough. The Soviet divisions were often seriously under strength, but even so, there were far more of them than the Germans expected. The Red Army had 150 divisions to meet 146 German divisions, with more Soviet divisions deployed against the Finns in the north. But there were also 133 Soviet divisions in the interior and the Far East. Although initially most Soviet tanks were either obsolete or unserviceable, they outnumbered the German tanks 20,000 to 3,350. Although new mechanized corps were being created, and two of the Soviet tanks, the new heavy KVs and the T-34, regarded as the most successful tank of the whole war by many, were invulnerable to current German tanks of the time and most anti-tank weapons. Many of the Soviet combat aircraft, 8,000 in number, were obsolete and again outnumbered the 2,000 German aircraft. But the Soviets were rapidly producing quality fighters and ground attack aircraft in large quantities. Soviet artillery excelled in both men and equipment, being highly regarded, as also the NKVD state police and air arms. So it had the best recruits. This, by the way, is a T-34 from the 1944 model, still in use by several armies in the world. This particular one was photographed in Bosnia-Herzegovina in 2014. The German plan of attack was as follows. The idea was to advance in three powerful thrusts. Army Group North towards Leningrad. This consisted of 6 mobile and 23 infantry divisions. Army Group Center towards Moscow, consisting of 15 mobile and 35 infantry divisions. And Army Group South towards Ukraine and the Caucasus, with 8 mobile and 33 German infantry divisions, and in addition 14 divisions of Romanian infantry. The plan was to defeat the bulk of the Red Army in 3 weeks through a series of envelopments, with panzer divisions breaking through and encircling Soviet armies, the infantry then killing or capturing the surrounded Soviet troops. This is a photograph of the German armored column on the Moscow front in October 1941, so you can see the tanks and the motorized infantry there. Note, by the way, the condition of the Soviet road, which became quite quickly a major problem for the German advance, because Soviet roads at that time were very poor in quality. In the German plan, Leningrad and the Baltic states would be captured quite quickly, Moscow and its defenders encircled and destroyed, and a line established reaching from the Caucasus and the Volga in the south to Archangel in the north. By the autumn of 1941, it was thought the number of German soldiers could be then reduced, with winter equipment only being allocated for those who would remain. This became a major problem. The German campaign was enormously successful in its opening weeks. Massive envelopments already in the first week, with 287,000 Red Army men captured in pockets in eastern Poland and what is now Belarus, along with 2,500 tanks and 1,500 artillery pieces. Halder, the German Chief of Staff, opined on the 3rd of July that whilst the war would continue, the initial campaign had been won in a fortnight. Given the size of the country, of course, and the amount of stubborn resistance to be overcome, there was still much to be done. Further victories followed, including the envelopment of Smolensk, which potentially netted over 100,000 Soviet soldiers, 2,000 tanks, and 1,900 guns. This is a map of the German advances up to the beginning of December 1941. You can see it's really very impressive, with all of the areas coloured on the map coming under German control in that comparatively short period of time, and almost reaching Leningrad in the north and Moscow in the northeast, as well as overrunning the Ukraine. The initial optimism, however, had to confront reality. By early August, it was evident that the objectives of Barbarossa would not be secured before the autumn rains came. In that sense, the campaign had failed despite its massive successes. Although badly mauled, the Red Army had not collapsed. The determination and tenacity of its men had steadily increased. The massive encirclements and forward thrusts of German mobile units had to be followed up by the regular infantry, who you remember were not motorized, trudging on foot before the rear areas could be secured and consolidated. The Soviet regime had not fallen apart. Alien invasion provoked popular nationalism, strengthened by the ruthlessness and brutality of the German occupation policies. Steady Soviet resistance increased German supply problems through partisan warfare, organized and led by Red Army officers and men left behind by the rapid German advances. In response, the German High Command had to prioritize their objectives. Supported by the staff of Army Group Center, they wanted to concentrate German mobile forces against Moscow, seeing it important as its capital and the center of communication. And it was too important and had too much prestige for the Soviets to let it be taken. Stalin would be forced, the Germans thought, to commit all his resources to its defense, and these could then be decisively defeated. But Hitler disagreed. He wanted to focus north and south with the objectives of securing control of the Baltic and the Crimea, north and south respectively. This to prevent air attacks on the Romanian oil fields, seize Ukrainian food supplies, and capture Russian industries in the Donetsk basin. In retrospect, Hitler was probably right. Soviet resistance had ended the possibility of victory in 1941. Certainly, whilst the advance of Army Group South had been slower, it had still captured 103,000 prisoners on the way to the Dnieper in early August, and with the addition of panzers and other troops from Army Group Center, trapped 5 Soviet armies, leading to the capture of 665,000 prisoners, 884 tanks, and 3,700 guns, taken Kharkov and advanced to Rostov and occupied the Crimea. After its mobile forces were restored, Army Group Center resumed the advance towards Moscow, again with staggering results, taking 660,000 prisoners, 1,242 tanks, 5,412 guns. At the time, it seemed that the Soviet Union was close to collapse. Over 4 million Red Army troops had been killed or captured, whilst the Germans had only lost some 560,000 men killed or wounded. That's about 1/6 of their original force. On the 14th of October, German Army Command ordered that Moscow be encircled, and there was panic in the city. Stalin and the military headquarters remained in Moscow, however, even though the government left. The Germans of Army Group Center now faced massive supply problems. The autumn rain and heavy use of the roads turned the poor Russian roads into mud, and the railheads were well behind the forward troops, the capacity of the railways being reduced by demolitions and by increased partisan activity. The Soviets, by contrast, had undamaged railways converging on Moscow, so that they were able to bring supplies and reinforcements into the city. This is a photograph of the famed Russian Rasputitsa, if I pronounce that correctly, the autumn rains, which, given the quality of the roads at the time, just turned them into mud. So you can see that vehicle having real problems getting through the mud there. Here's another picture of a German vehicle being escorted, pulled by German soldiers through the mud in November 1941. So these logistical problems were really massive and hard to overcome. As to Moscow itself, the city was now close to the front line. City defenses, trenches and defensive obstacles were constructed by the local population. General Zhukov assumed command of defense of the city on the 10th of October with 90,000 men. News from Richard Sorger, Stalin's spy in Japan, also indicated in late September that there was no immediate danger of a Japanese attack on the Soviet Far East, so that in October and November, at least 8 Soviet divisions with some 1,000 tanks and 1,000 aircraft were moved from the Soviet Far East towards Moscow. This is a photograph of Moscow women digging anti-tank trenches around the city in 1941. The German advance had halted early in November, but after the frost set in, movement became easier, and the advance resumed on the 15th of November, halting again at the end of November as extreme cold interfered with machinery and reduced mobility and the capacity for combat. The German offensive was formally ended on the 5th of December 1941, waiting for spring in 42 to resume. German units were now at greatly reduced efficiency, down to 65% for the infantry and even as low as 35% for the panzers, and only 30% of German lorries were usable. Whilst no fresh units now joined Army Group Centre for the Germans, the Red Army was being steadily reinforced by fresh troops from the east, including well-equipped and experienced winter fighters. The entirely unexpected Soviet counteroffensive began on the 5th of December, the same day the Germans had ended their 1941 campaign. This is a photograph of 2 miserable-looking German soldiers in the snow. A lot of the German troops were not equipped with sufficiently warm clothing to cope with the Russian winter, because it had been assumed that the campaign would be over before the extreme cold set in. These are some Soviet soldiers in white against the snow, and these forces operated with a massive counterattack against the Germans around Moscow. Then, on the 7th of December, that's 2 days after the Soviet counteroffensive had begun, the Japanese attacked the US Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, bringing the USA into the war. This is a picture of the battleship Arizona during the attack. Soviet resistance by this time had already defeated the German attempt to take control of continental Europe before America entered the war. That's all I'm going to say today, so thank you very much to you for listening, and particular thanks to my patrons for their kind support and encouragement, without which I couldn't make these videos. If you want to support my channel, you're very welcome to do that. Like, comment and share on the video, subscribe if you want to be notified of future videos. Patreon and PayPal links below if you want to provide practical support. Next week, Japanese expansionism. My apologies for any noises you heard whilst I've been recording. I've just moved house and haven't fully equipped this room against the traffic noises of the city. Anyway, have a good day.